And we're live. Welcome, Katie, to the Unhustle show today. I'm super excited to talk with you and dive deep. Before we go to dive deep into everything we want to talk about, peak performance, flow, energy, time management, I just want to introduce you really quickly with so that people understand who you are and why I've invited you to come today to the Unhustle podcast. So Katie Stoddart is the founder of the Focus Bee, which is an award-winning transformative leadership coach. She supports entrepreneurs and executives to reach and sustain peak performance in their business. And since peak performance is one of the things Unhustle really drives towards, I connected with Katie a while back. Actually, you interviewed me on your podcast a while back, and we hit it off. We can't stop talking. So I know we're very aligned in our thinking, and I'm excited to kind of pick your brain and talk a little bit more about distractions and focus and energy, and how do we really get into more of a self-leadership. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much, Milena, and thank you for the lovely introduction.
And you're chiming in from where? Because we're on different time zones.
Sweden, north of Europe,
Sweden, that's right.
Scandinavia.
Scandinavia. And is it getting into springtime there?
It is getting into springtime. It's wonderful here, yes.
Did I see that you coach in English, French, Spanish, and German?
Correct. Although
What?
90% in English, a few, well, maybe 5% in French, and there's only 1 or 2% here and there in German and Spanish.
Wow, that is pretty cool. I'm learning on my Spanish, which actually I took Spanish high school. So I'm trying to get back, but there's no way I can coach in Spanish yet.
Yet.
Yet. Although in a way I do, because we talk to the local guys and we give them unsolicited business advice all the time. So I want to get into this high performance, peak performance. Why don't we kick it off with what are some of what's just some of your advice, and how do you work with people on how to optimize our focus? Because obviously with technology overload, tech addiction, and all these things, we have too much to do, and focus becomes really our primary asset here. So let's kick it off with your 3-step overview on focus.
Yes, well, I'm super passionate about focus. My whole business is a Focus Bee. My podcast is a Focus Bee show. A lot of what I do is around focus. So I am glad that we kick it off with this topic. The first thing I look at is how people manage their short-term focus, which is their ability to be focused on what they're doing right now. So this is one type of focus, and we can dive into it a bit deeper, what we do if we're not able to be focused on the moment and what we're doing. There are lots of different tools, techniques, ideas, books on the subject, and I will go more into it. But first, I want to give an overview of the topic of focus. The second pillar of focus is your long-term focus. So is your direction clear? And this can be your goals for the month. It can be your weekly outcomes. It can be even what you want to do over the day, but it's having that clear direction that you're working towards, because it's harder to have that short-term focus, that daily focus, if you don't have that long-term focus and ability. And the last pillar is one that most people don't think about, which is selective focus. And this is your ability to select at any given moment what you want to work on, what you want to focus on, what you want to pay attention to. So this can be related to the short-term focus I mentioned at the beginning, which is what you're working on now. But selective focus, we're doing all the time. So it's not just when we're working. It's also when you're walking in the street. What are you choosing to focus on? Are you focusing on your thoughts? Are you focusing on the people around you? Are you focusing on the sky? And being able to determine ahead of time, what do you want to focus on in those moments in order to live a more fulfilled life, right? Because if you choose to focus on previous memories and traumas as you're walking down the street, it's probably not going to support your well-being. On the other hand, if you choose to focus on gratitude or on the scenery around you or on your goals and aspirations, that might lead to more happiness and joy. So selective focus is a broad focus that's maybe unusual to think about, but generally in terms of working with clients, we look at the short-term focus and the long-term focus.
Mm. I mean, from the way you're describing it, it sounds a lot like mindfulness to me.
Yes, so selective focus is the ability to decide beforehand what you want to focus on. And often the answer would be you would like to focus on the present moment because that's what works out best for you. So, yes, that would be it. And then short term focus is what most people think of when they say the word focus. It's what you're doing when you're sitting at your work during the day and you suddenly realize you're distracted. This is generally the image of focus that people have.
So I want to unwrap this just a little bit more, because what if I choose mindfully with intention to focus on something in the future? What if I don't want to be focused on the present moment? What if I choose I want to focus right now to design my next house and envision this, right? I mean, we don't always have to be in the present, or I don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree. So that's why I don't exactly call it mindfulness, because selective focus is you decide what you want to focus on. That's the selective focus. You think, okay, in this moment, I want to think about my aspiration or my dreams, or I want to revisit this happy memory I had. It's not all about always being present, although that can help. But maybe for your listeners and for your audience, it might be useful to look at this short term focus and how people can have more attention during the day and can manage their distractions, because I know that's the common issue people have.
All right, so let's dive deep into this. What are distractions? Why do we get distracted, and what can we do to minimize them?
Yes. So I love to think of Nir Eyal's book, Indistractable, and he explains that distraction are the opposite of traction. So traction is what you put the intention on, what you want to be working on, and distraction goes the other way. It's what you're doing instead. So that really is the definition. So social media isn't in and of itself a distraction, because if you decided to dedicate an hour on social media as part of your engagement and marketing, or to DM some people you needed to be in touch with, then that could be your traction. So nothing is in and of itself a distraction. It's only if it isn't what you set out to do and what you intended to do. So already that's the definition that Niriel explained in his books very clearly with traction and distraction. And I think it's the best definition I've found. And then in terms of managing distractions, the most important aspect, I feel, is looking at why we get distracted in the first place. What comes up time and time again is our emotions. So, if let's say you're working on a report during the day and you suddenly feel uninspired or bored or stuck or any of these emotions, this is when typically you're going to switch to your emails or do something else or pick up your phones. So being distracted really starts with a certain emotion. And depending on the people, it might be an emotion of frustration or boredom or annoyance or lack of clarity. I find myself most often distracted when I'm not clear what I need to do next. As soon as I'm super clear on my outcomes and what I'm doing, I don't tend to be distracted as much. So it's different for different people. I feel it really all begins with the emotion, and then we end up distracted and doing something else.
So, how much of the distractions really is our brain seeking that dopamine and feel good and avoiding pain? Because sometimes, in my case, if I have a big goal, I have a big vision, I really want to get to it, but it's not exactly the most maybe we got to overcome that fear, right? Fear and lean into the uncomfortable state. And so it's easy. And as an entrepreneur, you can really easy justify that, oh, I'm going to spend an hour on social media. I'm not getting distracted. It's beneficial for my business, or I'm going to, design my new program. Again, shorter term anyway. So it's still very meaningful. There's a financial benefit from it versus work. I want to finish my book, work on the book, which is a long-term project, no immediate gratification. So I want to, on a very practical level, let's dive into this. None of them are really distractions, but in a way they are keeping me away from that long-term project.
That's a great way of putting it. And it's interesting how some of the tasks that still need to be done are used as a distraction for maybe those bigger goals or project. To answer your questions, how many of these distractions are linked to dopamine thinking? I think probably most of them. I want to say all of them is we want that dopamine seek, or as you said, to not confront the fears that come up. And in the case of what you were explaining with having these big goals and projects and aspirations, and also the sort of daily things that maybe need to be done. One way that I've found to be very useful is again deciding with yourself ahead of time, okay, how much do you want to spend a day in terms of hours on these projects, or a week, what's your outcome that you want to work on, and sort of ensuring that you hit your targets. Because I don't think the idea is, for you to work on your book all day long and not check social media once, right? But if you decide ahead of time you want to work an hour or 2 hours or finish this chapter, then it's easier to sort of allow yourself that other time and the other tasks. It's all about finding that balance at the end of the day.
It's finding balance, but also it's watching your energy, right? Because if you're getting gratifications from social media, let's say, or you're doing something creative and productive where you find a lot of joy in, and then on the opposite side you're doing something that depletes your energy, it's very difficult to lean into the area that depletes your energy. Not in my case, because the book doesn't deplete my energy, but I'm saying when I work with people, and I don't know if that's in your case as well, sometimes we get that depletion of energy from working on certain project, and at the end of the day you feel exhausted, and then some days you find a lot of joy in what you're doing. And so how do you, when you work with people, how do you help them manage their energy from a perspective of the things that they can focus on?
Yes, I think energy management is so important. This is again where we meet, because I know with the Unhustle concept and everything that's behind it is linked to also managing our energy and being in flow. So to come back to what you were saying about focus, I think that it's really looking at what are some of the habits that you put in place in terms of energy management. And by habits, I'm not just talking about exercise. Obviously, that's important, and nutrition and all of that. But I'm also talking about habits during the day, like having a walk or breaks or conversations with people that light you up. So making sure that you have these energizing moments to support you. And with the projects that maybe drain you, looking at, okay, is there a good time of the day where you have enough of the energy to take it on? Is it a project that you need to take on to begin with? Can you delegate it? Can you eliminate it? Can you simplify it? Can you work with someone on it? So looking at how can you manage that project or that task in a way that's energizing for you. Recently, for instance, with some of my tasks, I used to believe I couldn't work with music on. I used to think, until about 3 days ago, I used to think I could only work with classical music and or total silence, which is what I mostly did. And then I had a few tasks that weren't particularly exciting that I wanted to do myself and I didn't want to delegate. And I thought, okay, I'll just put on some music. And I was so energized. And I thought, why do I never work with music? And I was so convinced that it would break my concentration, that I would mess things up. And in the end, it was great. So this is what I mean, finding some practices, whether it's while you're working or just before or just after, or choosing a good moment of the day, listening to yourself. At the end of the day, it really is about listening to yourself and finding what works and experimenting. This is what happened with music. Now I start all my days by, as soon as I turn on the computer, I listen to UB40 or Stevie Wonder or ABBA or something like really like high energy. And then if my tasks aren't super exciting, I'll continue listening to music. Or if I need to concentrate or have a call, I stop. But I found that gives me so much energy, because as you know, probably, and maybe some of your listeners or your audience, when you're working alone, and especially if you're an extrovert like me, then sometimes the energy can go down a bit. And something like music, in my case anyway, has really helped me to get my energy up.
I love what you're just saying. First off, I found another ABBA fan, which is pretty funny.
I love ABBA. I live in Sweden. I have to know. I loved ABBA
You
before
have
moving to Sweden.
Of course, I used to. Yeah, I listened to a lot of ABBA in my life in Bulgaria, but it's pretty funny. But yesterday, it's really interesting. You mentioned that yesterday. I was kind of getting ready to work on the book, and I was like, I'm just gonna listen to a little bit of Moby, and I started dancing, kind of moving your body, and I was speaking with somebody else yesterday about how movement is so important, about just, getting in our bodies. It helps you with energy and with, with even focusing, or overcoming that fear, right? Or stress, and how much we sit, really. So the importance of that dancing. Now, do you find it hard if the music you're listening to has lyrics?
I think that's what I always thought, but I think it depends on the task. And in the end, not that much, because I thought it would be impossible, for instance, to write my newsletter or write a LinkedIn post while listening to music. It's not impossible. I manage. So I used to think, oh, that's multitasking. And yeah, so maybe I'm not really listening to the lyrics, but I still hear the music. And if I really need to concentrate, I'll pause it. But I found that, and you're probably the same, when you've written about 1 million LinkedIn posts or newsletters, after a while, you get in the flow pretty fast and the words sort of flow out. And it's a bit like you're having a conversation with a friend and there's some music in the cafe at the same time. You can still talk with your friend. And so I'm pretty sure that, yes, my concentration isn't quite as high, but I think the energy I get compensates for the lack of concentration. When it gets too much, I pause or I turn it off. But this is like a new thing for me. It's like a whole revelation. I only started a few days ago. But there are ways. And that's what I mean with experimenting. There might be something that you or your audience or other people that listen to this at some point aren't actually practicing, but can make a huge difference in their energy levels.
I wonder how much of that listening to music just puts you in a better mood, and that emotion management, that sometimes, we keep thinking like, oh well, we have to do the things this way. But to your point, what if we give ourselves, the permission and the flexibility to say, hey, I'm going to try something new and different, and see how I feel, right? And listen to myself, and that whole self leadership that you talk about. So what are some ways that you help people with emotion management?
Yes, I love emotional management. I mean, I love all the topics, right? I keep saying I love this topic, I love this topic, but it's true. I love all of them. And focus and energy management, and what you were saying in terms of emotional management, that's super interesting. Well, first and foremost, I think it's identifying our triggers, but B, what sort of emotions we have on a regular basis. Because at the end of the day, we don't have that many, maybe 10 or 15 a week. The possibility for different emotions is huge, but the ones that we go back to over and over again, not so much. And it's identifying those patterns. Everything and all change and transformation always begins with that self-awareness and realization. And the self-awareness in terms of emotion is what sort of patterns come up and why or when do they come up. And after a while, you'll start to see over and over again the same type of patterns. It might be, for instance, in my case, pretty much every single day around 3 p.m., my energy level, but that also links to my emotions, go down. So my emotion would be maybe a bit bored or maybe a bit uninspired. Whereas in the morning, first thing in the morning when I begin to work, I feel excited and energized. So noticing the energy levels and noticing the correlation with the emotions, and then thinking of ways that we want to address them. So once you've identified a certain emotion that keeps coming up, let's say at the end of the day, maybe you're frustrated or you're angry or you're happy, but looking at what are the type of emotions that show up the most at the end of the day, and then thinking, how do you want to address these emotions? And as emotions are a sign of how we're feeling, how our body's feeling, what's going on in our life, are we living aligned? So of course we don't want to ignore these emotions. And if on a regular basis every single day we feel drained or unhappy or frustrated, then this means that there's something underlying this. And I feel that one of the biggest mistakes is that people just ignore it. They just push through it. They think, well, it doesn't matter. It's just because I had worked so many hours, or it's just temporary. So they don't address these emotions, and then they build up, and then it can lead to burnout or depression and all of this. So you want to address them as soon as possible and find the root cause. Of course, they're great tools like journaling. And if a person listening doesn't know why these emotions are showing up, you might need a bit of digging. Maybe a therapist or coach can help depending on the situation, but really getting to the bottom line of all of these recurring emotions, find out what's triggering them. And once you've identified that, obviously shifting either your thoughts around it or shifting the actual situation, because sometimes we can't shift the situation, then we need to shift our thoughts to shift our emotions. But it all begins with first awareness, then acceptance that we have these emotions, not pushing them away, and then going through the emotion. And going through the emotion means feeling it fully, not distracting ourselves, not ignoring it, not rejecting it, not being mad about it, just feeling it and letting it go. And I think it took me a really long time. I'm not saying I'm perfect now, but I manage more often to manage that acceptance stage, because it's a tricky one to not just reject those emotions that we don't want to have. But once we learn that, hey, it's okay if you're feeling a bit stressed or a bit annoyed or a bit frustrated, just breathe through it and then let it go, right? So I think once we learn to do that, the emotions don't stick around as much.
Again, I circle back to mindfulness. I mean, that was really the training when I did the mindfulness-based stress reduction training. Was part of the human potential coaching program. To me, that was the most eye-opening revelation. Was like, oh, we can bounce back so much faster and
So
get
true.
back to what you're doing by we don't. And this is why I think a lot of people are like hustle, 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 because it's uncomfortable to sit with these emotions, and it's so much easier to busy ourselves and say, I'm just checking off to-do list, this is what I'm told to do, this is how I'm going to achieve success, when on the inside you have all these emotions brewing and you don't give yourself the time to sit with your emotions. So from your perspective, you talk about transforming a business. So let's say I am a busy entrepreneur, solopreneur. If I am to transform my business, what would be your number one action item somebody can take?
I think the number one thing would be to do a really clear audit. And that's not only an audit of your business, but it would be to do an audit of how you're spending your time, how are your energy levels during the day, how focused you are, and having a really clear overview and audited everything. Because when you take a step back and you audit everything, you start to notice, oh, I'm spending so many hours on whatever it is, a project. And is that really paying back the way I'd like it? So I use a lot the Pareto principle, the 80-20, looking that you're really doing that famous, 20% of the actions that bring 80% of the results. And I do this with my clients, and I also do it myself. I tend to practice what I preach, and I look at how I spend hours. I track it all on my calendar during the months, for instance, and how did that impact my business, and did it really make a difference? And there might be some things where I thought, hey, that didn't take a lot of my time. And in the end, that converted into whatever, a great project, a client, as something exciting. Or it might be, on the other hand, I spent 10 hours on this month and that got me nowhere. What was the point? Maybe I can not eliminate it, but do 2 hours a month, and really tweaking that. So I think someone who's looking to transform their business, someone who's feeling maybe stuck or feels that they're too busy and they want to change it, first really audit, look at how are you spending your time. And also, like we explained with the energy, that's super important. So as I'm auditing, I'm not just thinking like, okay, these many hours, these results. I also look, how is my energy during the month? Did I feel excited? Did I feel reconnected with my purpose? Did I lose a bit of my motivation? And what triggered that? And how can I be more motivated? And do I need to take longer breaks or finish earlier? But etc., etc. So you really want to audit and look at it really clearly so that you're able to first decide how you want it to look, really contrast it, and then see what steps need to be made to transform. Because at the end of the day, what is transformation? It's just going from A to B being radically different from A. So this is your current situation. This is your future transformation that's amazing and has everything you want. And then looking, okay, what's the discrepancy? But to see the discrepancy, you need to be super clear on where you want to go. That's another super important step, and audit where you are. And then that's where all the work comes in, going from one to the other.
So just to be clear, how does that audit, you sit down and you work with the client, how does the client track their activities? Is that with a software or pad and paper, journaling? What's that look like?
There are lots of different options. I generally let my clients choose what they prefer. So they can either track it in their calendar, or they can use Toggle or Clockify, or they can use an Excel sheet, or they can use it on paper or journal. But really, it's to have a clear overview of how they're spending their time, their energy, and how focused they are during the day. Those are three separate types of audit. the hour one and how time is spent is a really sort of practical, pragmatic to find your Pareto. The energetical is because obviously you want to have high energy pretty much constantly, as much as possible. We're humans. As women, we have hormonal levels, etc. But you want to be at quite a good level of energy all the time, if not super high. And then in terms of attention, that's also separate work, but noticing, during the weeks or the months, how focused you are. And what I've noticed is with entrepreneurs that are very busy or overwhelmed, then focus tends to be low, energy tends to be low, and time is spent a lot, but we're not sure if it's working. So it's really sort of putting it all back together, increasing the energy. So generally that means a decrease in work, increase in energy, increase in focus, and then looking, okay, we're decreasing the hours because someone that's overwhelmed and busy needs to work less to gain the focus and energy. And decrease the hours means you need to reflect what's the really making the difference and what you need to eliminate, simplify, postpone in order to only focus on what really matters.
Thank you so much, Katie. Tell us how people can connect with you and find out more about how you can help them.
Yeah, sure. So my website's thefocusbee.com, and otherwise I'm on social media, LinkedIn, Katie Stoddart, Twitter, Katie Stoddart, or at the Focus Bee. Also on Facebook and Instagram that I use less, but you can also find the Focus Bee and Katie Stoddart, and also on my podcast, The Focus Bee Show. And you can also see my interview with Milena, where we talk about really cool stuff there too.
Thank you so much. I can keep talking to you, but I know you have other places to go to. So thanks for all your tips on focus and energy management and all the good stuff, these distractions that we talked about. Is there a place where people can say, well, what if I want to get deeper into this? What are like maybe Katie's favorite books that I can dive into?
Yes, depending on the sort of topic that the person wants to explore. But so there's Indistractable by Nir Eyal, that's very good in terms of managing distractions. There's Hyperfocus by Chris Bailey that I actually have right here. That's great. That's all about focus. Then there's Flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi that we also spoke about, I think, on the show. That's just great about how to have an optimal experience, so really be in flow during the day. I think those would be the top three in terms of focus and flow. And then there's Free to Focus by Michael Hyatt. That's also very good. There's loads, but those would be sort of the top four that come straight at the top of my head. So there must be a reason for that.
Thank you so much for these resources. So if you want to connect with Katie, her website is The Focus Bee. If you want to connect with me, the website is unhustle.com, where I work with people to get into peak experiences and peak performance, and do a little bit of the work that Katie does by incorporating well-being and mindfulness and lifestyle design. So thank you so much, Katie, for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.